This video is going to be about my own work, and it's going to be more personal and not as structured as some of my other stuff. It might not be for you, and that's okay. I'll have a more traditional essay next time. I've lived in Indiana for about 10 years at this point. College, grad school, my first careful steps into adulthood. And now I'm moving to Illinois, to be closer to my family, to try and settle down and begin the next phase of my life. And while I don't regret the choice to move, I am going to miss this place. I've lived all over the state, made a number of dear friends, wept through days that'll shape my identity for decades to come. I feel like the Midwest kind of gets a bad rap for being boring, conservative, and Christian. And while many of the criticisms of Indiana are valid, I did want to celebrate the time I spent here, to uplift the things I found strange and beautiful and endearing about the Hoosier state. J.R. Tolkien famously wrote the Lord of the Rings series in an attempt to create, in his opinion, the first truly English epic. Years later, Stephen King would write his magnum opus Dark Tower series with a similar inspiration, to try and capture an American saga by way of the good, the bad, and the ugly. I wrote Finley, a Midwest fantasy, with a similar intent, though at a much smaller scale. I wanted to romanticize my time in Indiana, to try to condense it into brief flashes of feeling, so that maybe I could get to the heart of why, despite the many times this place has let me down, I'll be so sad to leave. I started by getting a lot of advice about system-neutral settings, from Josh Hiddy, who wrote Into the Riverlands, from the Plus One EXP Discord server, from poring over ZXCU's gorgeous prose and straight-up copying the simple layout of 1,000 Islands. I even attempted to make some art after watching Brandon Yu's Who's Chaocalypse on YouTube, photo bashing tutorials. I don't really know how well that art turned out, as I went with a heavily obscured style that sort of muddled the details, but I think it works. I've always believed that a game's writing is the most important part of it. It's what makes the game a game. I think my art gets the right impressions across, though. Cornfields, pharmacists, an array of weird and interesting animals. They supplement the text tables, their pixelated faces allowing readers to fill in the blanks. Although, the actual best piece of art in the book is the cover by fellow Hoosier Andre Rivera, whose imagination and knowledge absolutely shaped the module. I didn't even know we were a Mastodon state until Andre suggested it, so please check out his other work at andrerivera.art, it's great. The text begins with something borrowed from Ironsworn, setting bullets. Not too much detail, but enough to give an impression of Finley, a sprawling forest to the south, a freshwater ocean to the north, and a city of skyscrapers at its heart. Mostly rural, smaller townships and villages gathered around a particular crop, a single factory, or a temple that ties the community together. 3 factions representing agriculture, manufacturing, and pharmaceuticals, some of Indiana's largest industries, and a government both distrusted and feared, handing down proclamations it only occasionally feels the need to enforce with terrible violence. At the same time, I wanted Finley to embody that sense of Hoosier hospitality the state is so fond of. The wealthy pay in coin, but for everyday Finlayans, there's an expectation that a favor will suffice. That's not really how Indiana works, but it's the way I tell people from the coast it does. The 3 factions are comprised of 2 tables each, leadership and assets. Each leader is structured with a description, motivation, and quest hook, with the hope that picking any random name would give players at least a session's worth of interesting material. Assets, on the other hand, I hoped would flesh out the feel of each faction, as well as give GMs interesting tools to throw at players who pissed off the wrong people. For example, the Shepherds, a pretty transparent analog for the Christian majority in the state, have all the strengths of a religious monopoly, but also very much have a direct line to a giant god sheep. My favorite faction is the Bone Chemists. They're a combination of pharmaceutical manufacturer Eli Lilly and the near monopoly of Indiana University's health system, but with necromantic powers. Which is to say, by granting them skeleton monsters and autoimmune hexes, I've made them slightly less evil than their real-life counterparts. You know, I used to be a nurse, and far and away the medication I dispensed most in my short career was insulin. The American Diabetes Association estimates that roughly 13%, or almost 700,000 Hoosiers, are living with diabetes, resulting in $6.5 billion in annual medical expenses. You'll hear horror stories about people rationing their insulin doses everywhere in the US, but it's especially galling that folks in Indiana have died without the life-saving drug, considering one of the 3 biggest manufacturers in the country is based in Indianapolis. It's telling that a fake tweet wiped out 4% of Lilly's stock value when it offered to give away insulin for free, when in reality they've hiked its price 1,200% over the last 15 years. It's things like this that put a crack in my rose-colored glasses. It's why Finley is not all popcorn and fireworks. There is love in these pages. There's also despair. I added 3 major cities into the book because I spent most of my time here in 3 major regions. Orchard is based on the towns I went to school in, using old pictures of their buildings to impart some sense of history, of time having not fully passed, or a refusal to leave memories behind. The events table is full of weird hooks for GMs to build adventures from, but every single one of them is based on real phenomena. For example, the locust emergence is inspired by the swarms of cicada brood X. I vividly remember 2 years ago when they burst screeching from the earth in their millions. Months later, as I hiked the forest behind my apartment, the ground was still pockmarked with their holes. Brightwater stands in for Northwest Indiana, caught between the blue waters of the cold sea and the shining lights of the city-state of Galestorm. The characters of Brightwater are varied and weird, echoes of work colleagues, chance encounters, half-remembered legends. Cruz Valix is an underpaid teacher, a synthesis of dedicated and long-suffering co-workers from my time as a school nurse. Wrench Chambo is every hot-headed gun nut, training furiously for a war he swears is on the horizon, a parody of that one time a Nazi decided I was at the wrong bar. Northwest Indiana, particularly Gary, is a region that was hard hit by the collapse of the US steel industry in the 60s, which, combined with decades of white flight, have left it neglected and undersupported by the state. I met some of the kindest, hardest working people in the world there. These snippets don't do them justice, but I hope my genuine fondness for the region comes through when I write about tough characters who deserved better. But at the center of it all is the court, a city of towers and yearning, Indianapolis as I best can mythologize it. Indiana's state obsession with basketball became the sport of sling ball. The 500 morphed into a battle royale with tractors called the Grudge. At my first college party, I saw a man do a shot of fireball through his nostril, and the experience was so indelibly burned into my mind that I had to canonize it into the Corn Christmas Festival of Wintertide. These events are supposed to be fun, unique touchstones, a flash of insight into the culture and people of the court. What does it say about a place that celebrates sling ball like a holy month, while at the same time dedicates only 12 hours a year to petitioning the government for aid? There's a reason the most prominent symbol of the auditors is a Goliath wielding a gavel. Each of these sections is a short snippet, 3 or 4 sentences I'm frankly pretty proud of, because that limitation meant every word had to hit. That brevity also provides space to hide secrets within the text. The first mention of the white-tailed god is in the wildlife table for deer, which promises the rise of their master. Further probing into the book reveals the god's favorite lookout point, and suggests his cult wants something from a cathedral. The encounter table has herds of deer watching you, unblinking, as if they know something you do not. And at the very end, on the treasure table, you can roll to find God's velvet antler, which calls you to sink your teeth into marrow, which, if you permit it, will crown you with jagged bones, implying you are the white-tailed god reborn. It's a neat little questline, but also by no means mandatory or explicit. It's just there, a secret to be discovered for those who give the text a closer look. The local legends section is a series of short tables, plot hooks to structure a quest while you're outside of big settlements. One I'm particularly fond of is the Graveyard Median, which is just a graveyard set squarely in the middle of a road, being excavated by archaeologists. It's based on a real place, when a road was being built that would run through the grave of Nancy Barnett. Her grandson Daniel grabbed a shotgun and defended the site for what some records say was weeks before the county gave in. It's little stories like that I feel are so essentially Hoosier to me. A lone man standing up for his family history. It's so cliche as to be trite, except that it really happened. There's a lot of mythologizing in Finley, but the truth of Indiana is stranger, more earnest and fantastic than any fiction I could invent. The name of the module comes from the poet John Finley, who wrote the poem The Hoosier's Nest, canonizing Indiana's odd demonym. It's a product of its time, certainly, but I included my favorite lines to open the book. Blessed Indiana, in thy soil are found the sure rewards of toil, where honest poverty and worth may make a paradise on earth. It's almost ironic, given our state's abysmal quality of life rankings, our rush to ban abortion last year, our former governor being one of the most universally reviled vice presidents in recent U.S. history. Who would call this land, stolen by musket and sword, a paradise? I don't know many who would. Yet, that is the way I want to remember it. A place where millions of people wake up every morning in Terre Haute, in Gary, in Indianapolis, and, in spite of a government that has nothing but contempt for them, try their absolute damnedest to make a better life for themselves and their communities. Our leaders tout business friendliness while we boast the worst maternal mortality in the country. Hell, the man likely to be our next governor wants interracial marriage to be a states' rights issue. And somehow, nurses, teachers, farmers, students, parents, all manage to grit their teeth and do what needs to be done. The people of Indiana deserve better than what they've got. But due to the ways in which districts are gerrymandered, votes suppressed, insurance and rent held hostage by people with a political and ideological monopoly, it'll be a long time before Hoosiers get what they deserve. I love the state. I love the friends I've made, the lessons I've learned, the person I've grown into because of my time here. But this state does not love me back. So that's Finley. Wish you well. A breakup letter. 6,000 words of memories. It's not enough, could never be enough to honor the people I'm leaving behind. It's the best I can do. I hope I can come back someday. I never really wanted to leave. But until then, wherever life takes me, when I dream about the moonlight on the Wabash, I'll be longing for my Indiana home.
The gleaming sands of life.